I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts. But here I am. Maybe it's just a way to get it all out, or maybe I need to hear from people who've been through something similar. Either way, this is my story. My name's David Miller. I'm 42, and I built my company, Miller Developments, from the ground up. Blood, sweat, and years of grinding made me one of the biggest names in the construction industry. I had the life I worked for, a successful business, a beautiful wife, and a circle of trusted friends. Or so I thought. My wife, Katie, is 37. Smart, charming, and always knew how to work a room. She came from a background in real estate, which made us a power couple. She had connections, I had the business. It was a perfect match. Until it wasn't. The thing about betrayal is that you never see it coming, not until it's too late. And in my case, I didn't even suspect a thing until my best friend Mitch dropped a bomb on me. It was a regular Wednesday. I was in my office reviewing some site plans when Mitch called. I could tell from his voice something was off. "Dave, we need to talk. In person." I was swamped, but something in his tone made me agree. We met at a bar downtown, the kind of place we used to hit up back in our early days of hustling. He ordered 2 whiskeys and didn't waste time. "I need to tell you something, and I hate being the guy to do it," he started. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. "Just say it." "It's Katie. She's been messing around with Robert Walsh." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Robert Walsh was a real estate agent, one of those slick, overconfident types who preyed on married women with money. He had a reputation, but I never thought Katie would fall for it. Mitch continued, "I saw them. More than once. I wasn't sure at first, but man, it's real. I even got a picture." He slid his phone across the table. And there it was. My wife, my Katie, laughing in some dimly lit restaurant, her hand resting on Robert's arm like he was her world. I won't lie, my first reaction was pure rage. I wanted to find Robert and knock his teeth in. But I'm not the kind of man who acts without thinking. I needed more than a blurry photo. I needed the full truth. I took a deep breath, downed my whiskey, and made a decision right there. If Katie thought she could play me for a fool, she had no idea who she was messing with. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to beg. No, I was going to destroy her and Robert piece by piece. And I knew exactly where to start. After Mitch dropped that bombshell, I didn't go home. I couldn't. I sat in my car for a while, just gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. Katie and I had been married for 10 years. We built everything together. Or at least, that's what I thought. Now all I could see was that image, her with Robert Walsh, touching him like she used to touch me. I wasn't going to be stupid about this. I wasn't going to explode and tip her off. No, if I was going to make her pay, I needed proof. That's when I called Rebecca Torres, a private investigator I had used once before for a business dispute. She was sharp, efficient, and ruthless when it came to uncovering the truth. "Rebecca, I need you to follow my wife." She didn't ask unnecessary questions. Just said, "You'll have everything you need in a week." And that's how it started. For the next few days, I acted normal. That was the hardest part. Katie didn't suspect a thing. She came home late a couple of nights, feeding me the usual lies, some work event, some late client meeting. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and pretended everything was fine. The hardest moment? Friday night. She got all dressed up, that tight black dress I always loved. Did her hair. Put on perfume. "Where you headed?" I asked casually, sipping my drink. She smiled, all sweet and innocent. "Dinner with some of the girls from work. Don't wait up, okay?" I almost laughed. If only she knew. I kissed her goodbye like nothing was wrong. And the moment she walked out, I texted Rebecca. She just left. Where is she really going? 15 minutes later, Rebecca sent me a picture. Katie wasn't with her co-workers. She was sitting across from Robert Walsh in a private booth at a high-end restaurant. The kind of place we used to go to on anniversaries. I stared at the picture, my grip tightening around my phone. I had my confirmation. But this was only the beginning. Because Rebecca? She didn't just catch them having dinner. She caught them doing business. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a personal betrayal. This was a professional one too. And that changed everything. At first, I thought this was just about my wife cheating. That was bad enough. But what Rebecca found next. That's what turned this from a personal problem into a full-scale war. Saturday morning, she sent me an email. You're going to want to see this. I opened the attachment, expecting more photos of Katie and Robert sneaking around like teenagers. Instead, I found documents, emails, financial records, and text exchanges. Katie and Robert weren't just having an affair. They were running a scam. I skimmed through the files, and the more I read, the angrier I got. Katie had been using my company's inside information to make shady real estate deals with Robert. She was giving him details about land acquisitions, upcoming projects, stuff that could make him millions if he got the right properties at the right time. And it wasn't just that. They were stealing. Katie was helping Robert inflate property values and manipulate commissions, splitting the extra cash behind her firm's back. Her company had no clue. And worst of all, some of those properties were ones I had plans to develop. They were sabotaging my business while they played house together. I sat there, gripping my coffee cup so hard it nearly cracked. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. I called Rebecca immediately. How solid is this? Rock solid, she said. I have records of money being funneled into a private account. The same one your wife uses for personal expenses. My stomach turned. That account? That's where she pulled money from for vacations, shopping, spa trips, all those little luxuries I thought I was providing. So, in reality, I was funding my wife's affair. I clenched my jaw. How deep does this go? Rebecca sighed. Deep enough that if this gets out, they're done. Professionally and legally. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I had more than just a cheating wife now. I had two criminals sitting in my lap, thinking they were untouchable. Well, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The next step was gathering allies. I couldn't do this alone. I needed people who hated Katie and Robert as much as I did. The first call I made? Robert's wife, Sandra Walsh. Sandra and I had never been close, but I knew one thing: she wasn't the type to take betrayal lightly. If Robert had been screwing around on her, she'd want revenge just as much as I did. She picked up on the second ring. David? What's going on? I didn't sugarcoat it. I need to meet with you. It's about Robert. And it's bad. Silence. Then a clipped, where and when. I gave her a time and place. Then, I called Jessica Henderson. She was Katie's former mentor, a powerful name in real estate, and the woman who had given Katie her first big break. They had a falling out a couple of years ago, and I never knew why. But if Jessica still had bad blood with my wife, she'd be a powerful ally. When I told her what was happening, she didn't even hesitate. Tell me where to be. I was assembling my army. Katie and Robert thought they were winning. But the game had just changed. By Monday night, I had my team. Sandra Walsh. Jessica Henderson. Mitch. Rebecca. For people who had every reason to want Katie and Robert to crash and burn. We met in a private conference room at one of my properties. No interruptions, no distractions. Just a group of people ready to tear two snakes apart. Sandra walked in first. She looked cold. Not angry, not devastated, just focused. I slid the folder across the table. Before we talk, you need to see this. She flipped through the documents. At first, she didn't react. Then, she let out a short, bitter laugh. That son of a, she cut herself off, shaking her head. Unbelievable. I knew he was a liar, but this? Stealing? This is prison time. I nodded. That's why we're here. Jessica arrived next. She was different. No laughter, no shock, just pure business mode. She barely glanced at the folder before looking up at me. I knew your wife was ambitious, but I didn't think she was this stupid. Mitch was last. He already knew about the affair, but when he saw the fraud, his face darkened. David, tell me you're not just exposing them. Tell me you're going to ruin them. I looked around the room. I don't want revenge. I want total destruction. No one disagreed. We spent hours planning. Sandra had connections in Robert's real estate circles. If she pulled the right strings, every investor, client, and partner he had would turn against him. His empire would crumble. Jessica had influence over high-profile deals. If she stepped in, she could ensure that Katie and Robert lost their biggest contracts overnight. Rebecca had the hard evidence. The kind that could bury them legally. Mitch? He was my wild card. He knew how to spread information the right way, just enough to start a whisper campaign in the industry. By the time we went public, everyone would already suspect something. This wasn't just a takedown. This was a coordinated attack. And for the final blow, we were going to expose them in public. At a high-end restaurant. In front of everyone who mattered. Sandra would confront Robert. I would confront Katie. And at the same time, Jessica would pull the rug out from under them professionally. By the end of that night, they wouldn't have a career, a reputation, or even a place to go. We set the date. 1 week. For the next 7 days, I played my role perfectly. I acted like the same devoted husband. I kissed Katie goodbye in the mornings. I listened to her fake stories about work stress. She had no idea. She was walking straight into her own execution. For the next week, I lived a double life. To Katie, I was still the loving, clueless husband. I made her coffee in the mornings. I asked about her day. I even let her vent about stress at work, knowing full well that her biggest stress was keeping her affair a secret. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the walls were closing in on her and Robert. Sandra worked fast. She reached out to Robert's biggest investors, hinting at financial irregularities in his business. The rumor spread like wildfire. By Wednesday, 3 major investors pulled out of his deals. Jessica did her part too. There was a luxury property deal Katie and Robert had been counting on. Jessica made sure it went to someone else. The deal collapsed overnight. They were scrambling, and they didn't even know why. Rebecca? She went deeper. She found emails between Katie and Robert discussing their money laundering. They weren't just manipulating commissions. They were hiding cash, probably for a future escape plan in case they got caught. Too bad for them. I wasn't just catching them. I was burying them. Katie was oblivious. Friday night, she came home with takeout, acting like the perfect wife. She cuddled up next to me on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I glanced over and saw Robert's name pop up in her messages. She turned the screen away. I almost laughed. If only she knew. She sighed, resting her head on my shoulder. I was thinking, we should take a vacation soon. Just the 2 of us. We haven't in a while. A vacation. She wanted me to pay for a vacation while she was screwing another man and stealing from my business? I forced a smile. That sounds great, babe. Let's plan something. She beamed and kissed my cheek. I love you. The audacity. The final nail in the coffin was setting up the confrontation. Sandra chose the venue, a high-end restaurant where all of our industry friends would be. It was Robert's favorite place, the kind of spot where he loved to show off. Jessica made sure Katie and Robert would be there. A fake business opportunity. Too good to pass up. Mitch made sure the right people were watching. Rebecca? She had the final bombshell of evidence, ready to be delivered at the perfect moment. And me? I was just waiting. Waiting for the moment Katie realized her entire world was about to collapse. By the time Saturday night rolled around, everything was in place. Katie thought she was going to a private dinner meeting, some big opportunity Jessica had dangled in front of her. Robert thought the same. They had no idea they were walking into their own public execution. I dressed sharp. Tailored suit. Polished shoes. Calm demeanor. The perfect picture of a man who had no idea his wife was cheating on him. Katie was stunning, as always. She wore a red dress, the same one she wore on our anniversary last year. The irony made me sick. You look beautiful, I told her, smiling. She grinned, leaning in. I'm so lucky to have you. I almost laughed. You have no idea how lucky you are. Or how quickly that luck is running out. We arrived at the restaurant exactly on time. It was packed, industry elites, business leaders, real estate moguls. The kind of people whose opinions mattered. The kind of people who could end careers with a single rumor. We were escorted to a private dining area, just like Katie and Robert expected. Sandra was already there, sitting stiffly at a table across from Robert. She looked deadly calm. Mitch and Jessica sat at another table, casually sipping wine, watching everything unfold. And me? I played dumb. I pulled out Katie's chair like a gentleman, sat down beside her, and waited. Waited for the moment everything would implode. Dinner started off polite. Small talk. Fake smiles. Robert, ever the arrogant snake, was eating it up. He had no idea his world was seconds away from collapse. Then Sandra leaned forward, setting her napkin down. "Robert, I have a question." He smirked. "Of course, babe. What's up?" Sandra didn't even blink. "How long have you been screwing Katie?" Silence. I felt Katie tense beside me. Her whole body went stiff, like a deer in headlights. Robert's smirk faltered. "Sandra, what the hell are you talking about?" She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and slid it across the table. A picture of Katie and Robert kissing in a hotel lobby. Katie gasped. Robert's face drained of color. The entire restaurant had gone dead silent. People were staring. Whispers started. And that was when I leaned back in my chair, sipped my wine, and dropped my own bomb. "You should probably keep scrolling, Sandra," I said casually. "It gets worse." Sandra did. And that's when she found the money trail. The fraud. The secret account. The stolen commissions. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God." Katie finally found her voice. "David." I turned to her, calm as ever. "Don't. Just don't." She shut her mouth. She knew. She knew she was done. Robert stood abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this crap." Sandra cut him off. "Sit down." And to my absolute delight, he did. Katie was pale. Robert was shaking. And the entire restaurant was watching their humiliation unfold. And we weren't even done yet. Because that was the moment Jessica struck the final blow. She stood gracefully, walking over to the table like she had all the time in the world. "Before you two go into damage control mode," she said smoothly, "I thought you should know. That big luxury deal you were counting on." She smiled. "It's gone." Katie visibly flinched. Jessica leaned down slightly, her voice just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I made sure of it." Robert made a strangled noise in his throat. His last professional lifeline? Severed. And Katie? She finally snapped. "You set me up," she hissed, turning on me. "You did all this." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Set you up?" "No, sweetheart." My voice dropped lower, just for her. "You did this to yourself." She had no words. For the first time, Katie, my lying, cheating, manipulative wife, had nothing to say. I stood up, adjusting my suit jacket. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Then, with the entire room still watching, I walked out. And left Katie and Robert to rot. The moment I walked out of that restaurant, it was over for them. I didn't look back. Didn't wait to see how Katie tried to talk her way out of it. Didn't care if Robert begged for damage control. Their fate was already sealed. The drive home was quiet. Mitch sat beside me, grinning like a madman. "You really pulled it off," he said, shaking his head. "That was beautiful." I just exhaled, staring at the road. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt empty. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of building a life with someone who turned out to be a stranger. And now? Now, it was nothing but a pile of ashes. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just personal. It was legal. And the next step? Was making sure Katie and Robert never recovered. By morning, the news was already spreading. The real estate world is small. And once a scandal like this breaks, it spreads like wildfire. Sandra wasn't playing games. She filed for divorce immediately. Freezing accounts, locking Robert out of their assets, and going for the throat. Jessica? She made one phone call to Katie's firm. By noon, Katie was fired. Not just fired. Blacklisted. That fancy real estate career she built? Gone. No agency would touch her now. Robert? Same deal. The investors who hadn't already pulled out? Ran for the hills. By the end of the day, his company was in free fall. But the best part? Rebecca sent our evidence to the authorities. Because fraud and money laundering? That's not just unethical. That's criminal. And soon, Katie and Robert were going to find out just how much prison time their little scheme was worth. That night, I sat alone in my house, our house. Katie hadn't come home. I didn't expect her to. But then, my phone buzzed. Incoming call, Katie. I stared at the screen. Let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text popped up. Katie, please. Just talk to me. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I laughed. Actually laughed. She didn't mean for it to be like this? What did she mean then? That she meant to cheat, but not get caught? That she meant to steal, but only if she got away with it? She meant every single thing she did. She just didn't mean for it to backfire. And that? That wasn't my problem anymore. I turned off my phone, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. Because Katie's life was about to fall apart. And I was going to enjoy watching every second of it. By Monday morning, Katie had nowhere to hide. Sandra's lawyer went straight for the jugular. She froze all of Robert's assets, leaving him scrambling for money. Meanwhile, the fraud allegations? Those were gaining traction. Rebecca made sure of that. She sent the evidence to the authorities, industry watchdogs, and even a few reporters. The moment Katie and Robert's names got attached to financial crimes, their entire network abandoned them. By noon, I got a text from Jessica. Jessica, check the news. You're going to love this. I pulled up the link she sent. Local real estate agents under investigation for fraud, illegal commission scheme uncovered. And right there, in bold letters, were Katie and Robert's names. That afternoon, I finally went home to our empty house. Katie had been staying somewhere else, probably with whatever friends she had left. But the locks were changed. She wasn't coming back. Mitch came over, a six-pack in hand. So, how's it feel? I cracked open a beer, exhaling slowly. Like I can finally breathe. Because for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't being lied to. I wasn't being used. I wasn't being made a fool of. And soon, Katie wouldn't even have a name left to hide behind. Then, late that night, she finally showed up. I was in the kitchen when I heard pounding on the front door. I took my time walking over. When I opened it, there she was, Katie. She looked rough. Like she hadn't slept. Like she'd been crying for days. David, she whispered. Please. I leaned against the doorframe. Please what? She swallowed hard. I lost everything. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. Yeah, I said finally. So did I. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't mean. I cut her off. Stop saying that. You did mean it. You meant all of it. She shook her head furiously. Robert lied to me. He promised me we'd make more money, that it was just a harmless trick to get ahead. And you were always so busy, David. I felt alone. I laughed. A real, bitter laugh. Oh, so this is my fault. I tilted my head. I was busy? You mean, working my ass off to build a life for us? While you were sneaking off to hotels with Robert. Katie winced, looking down. She had no defense. Because there was none. I love you, she whispered. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Please. I exhaled slowly. Katie, I need you to listen very carefully. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. There is no we anymore. And with that, I shut the door in her face. She stood there for a moment. Then, I heard her break down. Sobbing, begging, pleading for another chance. But I didn't open the door again. Because Katie wasn't crying because she regretted what she did. She was crying because she got caught. And I was finally free. After I shut the door in Katie's face, I expected her to leave. She didn't. For the next 10 minutes, she kept knocking. Then it turned into banging. Then came the pleading. David, please. Just talk to me. I didn't. Eventually, she gave up. I heard her sobbing as she walked away, heels clicking down the driveway. Then, the sound of a car engine starting. I didn't feel bad. Not one bit. Because while she was outside crying, I was inside, making the final move that would destroy her completely. First, I texted Rebecca. How soon can we escalate the legal charges? Rebecca, already working on it. Your lawyer should have a case ready by morning. Perfect. Then, I texted Mitch. She just showed up at my house. Begging. Mitch, of course she did. She's got nowhere else to go. Not my problem. And it wasn't. Because while Katie was out there grasping for lifelines, I was cutting off the last one she had left. The next day, my lawyer filed the divorce papers. Katie was officially locked out of every asset. Her name was removed from every joint account. The only money she had left was whatever she had personally saved. Which, thanks to Rebecca's investigation, wasn't much. That secret bank account she used for the fraudulent deals? Frozen. The authorities were on it now. She had nothing. And then? The final blow. That afternoon, I got a call from Jessica. Jessica, it's done. Katie's last real estate license was revoked. She was officially unemployable in her own industry. Robert? Same fate. His business had completely collapsed. I leaned back in my chair, letting it sink in. Everything they built together? Gone. Katie was homeless, jobless, and facing serious fraud charges. Robert was broke, abandoned by his investors, and about to lose everything in the divorce. I had won. But the best part? The real punishment hadn't even started yet. Because now? I was going to make sure Katie never got back up again. By the time Wednesday rolled around, Katie was in full-blown panic mode. I knew this because she started calling everyone. Mitch told me she reached out to him, begging for information. He didn't pick up. Sandra said she got a message from Katie too. Something about clearing the air. Sandra blocked her. Jessica? Same thing. Katie was grasping at straws, trying to find a single person left who would help her. She found no one. And then? She called me. I was in my office when my phone lit up. Incoming call. Katie. I stared at it for a moment, debating. Then, at the last second, I picked up. David, please don't hang up. Her voice was shaky. Desperate. Like she knew she had lost everything. I leaned back in my chair. You have 2 minutes. I heard her take a deep breath. She was probably rehearsing some speech in her head. Some last-ditch effort to manipulate me. I know I messed up, she said quickly. I know I betrayed you. But David, you can't just erase me from your life like this. I said nothing. She kept talking. 10 years together. That means something, doesn't it? I finally spoke. No, Katie. It doesn't. Silence. Then, her voice dropped lower. Angrier. You really think you're innocent in all this? You were always working, David. You left me alone all the time. And Robert, he was there. I smiled bitterly. There it was. The blame shifting. The excuses. You're right, I said. I was working. You know why? She didn't answer. Because I was building a life for us. A future. While you were out screwing Robert and stealing from me. Her breath hitched. She wasn't expecting me to throw the fraud in her face. David, I didn't. I cut her off. You're a liar, Katie. Always have been. She started sobbing. I could hear it through the phone. I don't know where to go, she whispered. I don't know what to do. I almost laughed. Not my problem. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again. You should have thought about that before you ruined your life. Then, I hung up. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt nothing for her. By Friday, Katie and Robert were officially done. Their fraud charges were public. The authorities had enough evidence to start a case. And if things went the way I expected, they'd both be facing jail time. Jessica sent me an update. Jessica, Katie's old clients are pulling every deal she's ever done. She's radioactive. Sandra followed up with another message. Sandra, Robert moved out of our house today. He's broke. Staying at some motel. Looks miserable. I sat back in my chair, rereading the messages. This was it. Everything I planned had worked. Katie and Robert were financially ruined. Their careers were over. And soon, they'd have criminal records to go along with their disgrace. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Because as much as I had destroyed them, I wasn't done building myself up. I wasn't just going to move on. I was going to make sure that Miller and Pierce Developments became something so powerful that Katie and Robert would hear my name for the rest of their miserable lives. And I knew exactly who to build it with. That night, I made one final phone call. Amanda Pierce. She was a brilliant designer. Sharp. Strategic. The opposite of Katie in every way. We had talked business before, but now? Now, I was ready to take things to the next level. She picked up immediately. David. I was wondering when you'd call. I smiled. Let's talk. Because while Katie and Robert were spiraling into ruin, I was about to build an empire. By the time Monday morning rolled around, Katie and Robert were officially untouchable. And not in a good way. Their names were poison. Rebecca updated me first. The authorities were moving fast. The fraud case had enough evidence that a formal investigation had been launched. It was only a matter of time before charges were filed. Then came the social fallout. Jessica had connections everywhere, and she made sure Katie couldn't get so much as a part-time leasing job. Every major real estate firm in the city knew about her role in the scheme. Robert? His company had completely collapsed. Sandra went nuclear in the divorce. She took their house, their savings, and even his car. Robert Walsh, the man who once strutted around like he owned the world, was now living in a dingy motel, broke and unemployed. And Katie? Katie had nothing left. I didn't check on her. Didn't look her up. Didn't ask anyone about her. I knew she had nowhere to go. That much was obvious from her last call. She had no job, no money, no friends left willing to take her in. But I didn't care. For the first time in a decade, I was done worrying about Katie. Because while she was falling into ruin, I was moving forward. That's where Amanda Pierce came in. I met Amanda a few years ago at a business conference. She was a brilliant architect and designer, but more importantly, she had the same vision for development that I did. While Katie had been wasting her time sneaking around with Robert, Amanda and I had been discussing real estate projects that could change the industry. So when I called her that Monday morning, I already knew where the conversation was going. David, she greeted smoothly. How's life treating you? I smirked. Better than some. She chuckled. I take it the situation with Katie has resolved itself? I leaned back in my chair. It's still unfolding. But I'm ready to move on. And I think you and I have a lot to discuss. There was a pause. Then, I could hear the excitement in her voice. Tell me everything. 2 days later, Amanda and I signed the contracts. Miller and Pierce Developments was born. She brought her design expertise, her high-profile connections, and her strategic mind. I brought the funding, the experience, and the drive to make sure we never failed. Together, we were unstoppable. And the best part? Katie and Robert were still watching. I got my first confirmation a week later. Rebecca sent me a message. Rebecca, guess who's been trying to get in touch with you? I already knew the answer. Me, Katie. Rebecca, bingo. She reached out to one of my sources. Apparently, she's been looking for jobs and getting shut down everywhere. Finally put 2 and 2 together and realized you had something to do with it. I didn't respond. I had no interest in hearing from Katie ever again. But later that night, my phone buzzed. Blocked number calling. I let it ring out. Then, a voicemail. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I hit play. David. I know you hate me, but please, I need to talk to you. Her voice was hoarse. Like she'd been crying for days. I lost everything. I don't have anywhere to go. No job, no money. No one will even talk to me. I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please. I just need to see you. Just once. Then, a long pause. A shaky breath. I don't know what to do anymore. Click. I sat there, phone in my hand, staring at the wall. Katie Miller, the woman who once thought she could manipulate and cheat her way through life, was broken. And honestly, I felt nothing. No sympathy. No pity. Just satisfaction. Because she did this to herself. And there was no coming back from it. The next day, I blocked her number. I wasn't going to give her a single ounce of my attention. Because while she was spiraling into nothing, I was building something greater than ever before. And that was the real revenge. Katie was officially erased from my life. Blocked on everything. No phone calls, no texts, no chance of her weaseling her way back into my world. But here's the thing about people like Katie. They don't just go away. It started small. One of my assistants mentioned that a woman had been calling the office. No name given, just someone asking about me. I didn't need to ask who it was. Then, Sandra sent me a text. Sandra, saw Katie today. She looks like hell. Me, where? Sandra, at some cafe downtown. She was sitting alone, on her phone. Looked like she'd been crying. I could picture it. Katie, once the woman who could charm an entire room, now a shadow of herself. I didn't care. She deserved every bit of it. Then came the real twist. She showed up. It was late, maybe 9 or 10 p.m. I had just finished a meeting with Amanda, finalizing some blueprints for our next big project. I walked out of the office building, heading to my car, and there she was. Katie. Standing on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself like she was freezing. She looked wrecked. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair unkempt. The expensive designer clothes she used to flaunt? Gone. She looked like she had thrown on whatever she could find. For a second, I just stood there staring. She didn't speak at first. Just looked at me like she didn't even recognize the man in front of her. Then, in the smallest voice, David. I sighed, shaking my head. What do you want, Katie? Her eyes watered instantly. I don't know where to go. I exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of my nose. That's not my problem. She stepped closer. David, please. You have no idea what I've been through. I have nothing left. I gave a humorless laugh. Yeah? Welcome to consequences. She flinched. Like she never actually expected me to be this cold. I was stupid, she whispered. I made a mistake. I let Robert manipulate me. I held up a hand. Stop. Her lip trembled. David, please, Stop. The word came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care. She shut her mouth instantly. Then I said what I had been waiting months to say. You didn't just cheat, Katie. You didn't just have an affair. You stole from me. You betrayed everything we built together. And now? Now, you want sympathy? You want forgiveness. Tears streamed down her face, but I wasn't finished. You don't get forgiveness, Katie. You don't get redemption. You get exactly what you deserve. She let out a small, shaky breath. I don't know what to do anymore. I shook my head, stepping around her. Figure it out. Then I got in my car, drove away, and didn't look back. That was the last time I ever saw her. Or at least, the last time I saw her in person. Because Katie Miller? She faded into nothing. One day, she was desperately calling people for help. The next? She was just gone. A few months later, I got confirmation from Rebecca. Katie had left the city. No job. No money. No future here. Robert? He was still struggling to stay afloat. Sandra had bled him dry in the divorce, and without his connections? He was a washed-up fraud with no credibility. And me? Miller and Pierce Developments had officially become one of the biggest names in the business. Amanda and I had secured multi-million-dollar projects. Our names were everywhere. Katie and Robert? They weren't just ruined. They were forgotten. And that was the real victory. Because now? The only thing left of Katie Miller was her own regret. After that night outside my office, Katie disappeared. No more calls. No more messages. No more desperate attempts to get my attention. She was just gone. At first, I expected her to try again. To show up, to beg, to play the victim. But she never did. And honestly, that made it even better. Because now, I didn't have to do anything. Life had already punished her enough. A few weeks later, Mitch and I grabbed drinks. He raised his glass. To the best revenge I've ever seen. I smirked, clinking mine against his. It wasn't about revenge, I said, taking a sip. Mitch raised an eyebrow. I set my glass down. It was about taking back what was mine. And making sure they never did this to anyone else. Mitch chuckled. Well, you did that. Damn right, I did. By the end of the year, Miller and Pierce developments had expanded globally. Amanda and I were making moves that Katie could only dream of. And her? She was just another cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when you betray the wrong man. And I never thought about her again. A year passed. Katie and Robert? Distant memories. No one talked about them anymore. Their names meant nothing. And me? I was thriving. Miller and Pierce developments had gone international. Our projects were in major cities around the world. My name wasn't just respected anymore, it was untouchable. And Amanda? She wasn't just my business partner anymore. She was so much more. One night, we were in Paris, finalizing a luxury development deal. Amanda and I sat on the balcony of our hotel, a bottle of wine between us. The city lights stretched for miles. She turned to me, smirking. You ever think about her? I didn't even hesitate. No. Amanda smiled, clinking her glass against mine. Good, she said. Because this is where you were always meant to be. And she was right. Katie and Robert had tried to tear me down. Instead, they had made me unstoppable. And now? I had everything I ever wanted. And more. 5 years later, I barely remembered Katie Miller. She was just a name from my past, a mistake I had long since corrected. Miller and Pierce Developments was now a global powerhouse. Amanda and I had built something bigger than I ever imagined. And Katie? Last I heard, she was working retail in some small town. Living paycheck to paycheck. Forgotten. Robert? He drifted from failed job to failed job. His reputation was beyond repair. No one would ever trust him again. They had destroyed themselves. And me? I was standing at the top. One evening, Amanda and I were at a gala in New York, one of those exclusive high society events where the biggest names gathered. A journalist approached me, recorder in hand. David Miller. One of the most powerful names in real estate. You've built an empire in just a few years. Tell me, what's your biggest motivation? I glanced at Amanda, who gave me a knowing smile. Then, I looked back at the journalist and said simply, never let betrayal break you. Let it make you. And with that, I turned away, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Buried.